From 1800 and in the space of just 100 years, New York's population grew from 60,000 to nearly 2 million. It's no surprise that by the 1920s, New York had overtaken London as the most urbanized area in the world. Accommodation in converted houses and blocks no better than barracks was mean, filthy, and overpriced. No more than a tool for its owners to part money from the poor. If you were in work, you could survive, just about. If you lost your job, then a fate worse than even the overcrowded squalor of the tenements was waiting for you. The streets. For many, relative to the city's population, fell into the abyss of pauperism, begging, and crime. The half that was on top cared little for the struggles and less for the fate of those who were underneath, so long as they were able to hold them there and keep their own place. They knew nothing of how the other half lived. There was one man, however, who made it his mission to reveal the truth to politicians and fight for change. His name was Jacob Riis. Not only did Riis experience the poverty of the city's slums when working as a police reporter, he also documented and exposed the squalid living conditions of its tenements and the laissez-faire attitude of slum landlords. He was well placed to reveal such poverty, since, when he arrived in America in 1870, he had exhausted his money, experiencing hunger and homelessness for himself. As a reporter, he revealed and photographed dark streets of overcrowded tenements, stale beer dives, crime and poverty in the city's Lower East Side. Today, you will hear Riis's account of what he calls New York's paupers, some of the poorest denizens of the city, but ones, in his experience, that resorted to dishonest begging and, with schemes sometimes ingenious, deceived the public for charity money. The condition of being a pauper, a term now obsolete, refers to a person in poverty, but is generally understood to be someone who relied on public or private charity for support. Poor and pauper are words sometimes used interchangeably, but it appears that Riis makes a distinction between the poor and paupers. He describes the latter as being dishonest in their poverty. He gives an example where the pennies he witnessed a mother receive for begging with a baby from an unsuspecting public simply kept her in liquor, the baby being nothing but a bundle of rags, whilst others contrived false afflictions and ailments to make a business from begging. What he reported makes him view these people with little sympathy, more of a scourge of the tenements. Perhaps he was of the opinion that the charity they received might have better gone to the poor, or those he viewed as struggling with poverty, but attempting an honest living. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. If you have followed me regarding the fate of the other half thus far, you may not experience much of a shock at being told that in 8 years, 135,595 families in New York were registered as asking or receiving charity. Perhaps, however, the intelligence will rouse you that for 5 years past, 1 person in every 10 who died in this city was buried in the Potter's Field. This was a common grave for paupers, the unknown and unclaimed. Several locations were used for such burials at various times in the city's past, including Madison Square Park, Washington Square Park, Bryant Park, as well as Hart, Randall's, and Ward's Islands, Manhattan. These facts tell a terrible story. The first means that in a population of 1.5 million, very nearly, if not quite, 500,000 persons were driven or chose to beg for food or to accept it in charity at some period of the 8 years, if not during the whole of it. There is no mistake about these figures. They are drawn from the records of the charity organization Society and represent the time during which it has been in existence. It is not even pretended that the record is complete. 5,169 cases were investigated by the Society in 1 year. This was the way it turned out. 327 worthy of continuous relief, or 6.4%. 1,269 worthy of temporary relief, or 24.4%. 2,698 in need of work rather than relief, or 52.2%. 875 unworthy of relief, or 17%. Nearly 6.5% of all were utterly helpless. Orphans, cripples, or the very aged. Nearly 1/4 needed just a lift to start them on the road of independence, or of permanent pauperism, according to the wisdom with which the lever was applied. More than half were destitute because they had no work and were unable to find any, and 1/6 were frauds, professional beggars training their children to follow in their footsteps. It is worthy of note that almost precisely the same results followed a similar investigation in Boston. There were a few more helpless cases of the sort true charity accounts it again to care for, but the proportion of a given lot that was crippled for want of work or unworthy was exactly the same as in this city. The bankrupt in hope, in courage, in purse, and in purpose are not peculiar to New York. They are found the world over, but we have our full share. If further proof were wanted, it is found in the prevalence of pauper burials. The potter's field stands ever for utter, hopeless surrender. The last the poor will let go, however miserable their lot in life, is the hope of a decent burial. In that year, the proportion to the total mortality of those who died in hospitals, institutions, and in the almshouse was as 1 in 5. The 135,595 families inhabited no fewer than 31,000 different tenements. I say tenements advisedly, though the Society calls them buildings, because at least 99% were found in the big barracks, the rest in shanties, scattered here and there, and now and then a fraud or an exceptional case of distress in a dwelling house of better class. Here, undoubtedly, allowance must be made for the constant moving about of those who live on charity, which enables one active beggar to blacklist a dozen houses in the year. Still, the great mass of the tenements are shown to be harbouring alms-seekers. That scourge is not more contagious than the alms-seeker's complaint. There are houses that have been corrupted until their very atmosphere breathes beggary. More than 120 pauper families have been reported from time to time as living in one such tenement. The truth is that pauperism grows in the tenements as naturally as weeds in a garden lot. It finds there its most fertile soil. All the surroundings of tenement house life favour its growth, and where once it has taken root, it is hard to dislodge. The thief is infinitely easier to deal with than the pauper, because the very fact of his being a thief presupposes some bottom to the man. Granted, that is bad, but there is still something, a possible handle by which to catch him. To the pauper there is none. He is as hopeless as his own poverty. I speak of the pauper, not of the honest poor. There is a sharp line between the two, but athwart it stands the tenement, all the time blurring and blotting it out. It all comes down to character in the end, was the verdict of a philanthropist whose life has been spent wrestling with this weary problem. And so it comes down to the tenement, the destroyer of individuality and character everywhere. In 9 years, said a wise and charitable physician sadly to me, I have known of but a single case of permanent improvement in a poor tenement family. I have known of some whose experience, extending over an even longer stretch, was little better. The beggar follows the tough's rule of life, that the world owes him a living, but his scheme of collecting it stops short of violence. He has not the pluck to rob even a drunken man. His highest flights take in at most an unguarded clothesline, or a little child sent to buy bread or beer with the pennies he clutches tightly as he skips along. Even then he prefers to attain his end by stratagem rather than by force, though occasionally, when the coast is clear, he rises to the height of the bully. The ways he finds of collecting under the cloak of undeserved poverty are numberless, and often reflect credit on the man's ingenuity, if not on the man himself. I remember the shock with which my first experience with his kind, her kind rather, in this case. The beggar was a woman, came home to me. On my way to and from the office I had been giving charity regularly, as I fondly believed, to an old woman who sat in Chatham Square with a baby done up in a bundle of rags, moaning piteously in sunshine and rain. "Please, help the poor." It was the baby I pitied, and thought I was doing my little to help, until one night I was just in time to rescue it from rolling out of her lap, and found the bundle I had been wasting my pennies upon just rags, and nothing more, and the old hag dead drunk. Since then I have encountered bogus babies, borrowed babies, and drugged babies in the streets, and fought shy of them all. Most of them, I am glad to say, have been banished from the street since, but they are still occasionally to be found. It was only last winter that the officers of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children arrested a woman who was begging along Madison Avenue with a poor little wreck of a girl, whose rags and pinched face were calculated to tug hard at the purse strings of a miser. Over $5 in nickels and pennies were taken from the woman's pockets, and when her story of poverty and hunger was investigated at the family's home in a Baxter Street tenement, bank books turned up that showed them to be regular pauper capitalists, able to draw their check for $3,000 had they been so disposed. The woman was fined $250, a worse punishment undoubtedly than to have sent her to prison for the rest of her natural life. Her class has, unhappily, representatives in New York that have not yet been brought to grief. Nothing short of making street begging a crime has availed to clear out our city of this pest to an appreciable extent. By how much of an effort this result has been accomplished may be gleaned from the fact that the Charity Organization Society alone, in 5 years, caused the taking up of 2,594 street beggars and the arrest and conviction of 1,474 persistent offenders. Last year it dealt with 612 perambulating mendicants. The police report only 19 arrests for begging during the year 1889, but the real facts of the case are found under the heading Vagrancy. In all, 2,633 persons were charged with this offence, 947 of them women. A goodly proportion of these latter came from the low groggeries of the 10th Ward. The blind beggar alone is winked at in New York streets, because the authorities do not know what else to do with him. There is no provision for him anywhere after he is old enough to strike out for himself. The annual pittance of $30 or $40 which he receives from the city serves to keep his landlord in good humour. For the rest, his misfortune and his thin disguise of selling pencils on the street corners must provide, until the city affords him some systematic way of earning his living by work, as Philadelphia has done, for instance. To banish him from the street would be tantamount to sentencing him to death by starvation. So he possesses it in peace. That is, if he is blind in good earnest, and begs without encumbrance. Professional mendicancy does not hesitate to make use of the greatest of human afflictions as a pretense for enlisting the sympathy upon which it thrives. Many New Yorkers will remember the French schoolmaster who was blinded by a shell at the siege of Paris, but miraculously recovered his sight when arrested and deprived of his children by the officers of Mr. Jerry's society. When last heard of, he kept a museum in Hartford and acted the overseer with financial success. His sign with its pitiful tale, that was a familiar sight in our streets for years and earned for him the capital upon which he started his business, might have found a place among the curiosities exhibited there, had it not been kept in a different sort of museum here as a memento of his rascality. But, after all, the tenement offers a better chance of fraud on impulsive but thoughtless charity than all the wretchedness of the street, and with fewer risks. To the tender-hearted and unwary it is, in itself, the strongest plea for help. When such a cry goes up as was heard recently from a Mott Street den, where the family of a sick husband, a despairing mother, and half a dozen children in rags and dirt were destitute of the first necessities of life, it is not to be wondered at that a stream of gold comes pouring in to relieve. It happens too often, as in that case, that a little critical inquiry or reference to the black list of the Charity Organization Society, justly dreaded only by the frauds, discovers the sickness to stand for laziness, and the destitution to be the family's stock in trade, and the community receives a shock that for once is downright wholesome, if it imposes a check on an undiscriminating charity that is worse than none at all. The case referred to furnished an apt illustration of how thoroughly corrupting pauperism is in such a setting. The tenement woke up early to the gold mine that was being worked under its roof, and before the day was 3 hours old, the stream of callers who responded to the newspaper appeal found the alley blocked by a couple of toughs, who exacted toll of a silver quarter from each tearful sympathizer with the misery in the attic. A volume might be written about the tricks of the professional beggar, and the uses to which he turns the tenement in his trade. The Boston widow, whose husband turned up alive, and well after she had buried him 17 times, with tears and lamentation, and made the public pay for the weekly funerals, is not without representatives in New York. The gentleman tramp is a familiar type from our streets, and the once respectable Methodist, who patronized all the revivals in town with his profitable story of repentance, only to fall from grace into the saloon door nearest the church after the service was over, merely transferred the scene of his operations from the tenement to the church as the proper setting for his speciality. There is enough of real suffering in the homes of the poor to make one wish that there were some effective way of enforcing the paths of self-support. No work, nothing to eat. The message came from one of the health department's summer doctors last July to the King's Daughters Tenement House Committee that a family with a sick child was absolutely famishing in an uptown tenement. The address was not given. The doctor had forgotten to write it down, and before he could be found and a visitor sent to the house, the baby was dead, and the mother had gone mad. The nurse found the father, who was an honest labourer long out of work, packing the little corpse into an orange box partly filled with straw, that he might take it to the morgue for pauper burial. There was absolutely not a crust to eat in the house, and the other children were crying for food. The great immediate need in that case, as in more than half of all according to the record, was work and living wages. Alms do not meet the emergency at all. They frequently aggravate it, degrading and pauperizing where true help should aim at raising the sufferer to self-respect and self-dependence. The experience of the Charity Organization Society in raising, in 8 years, 4,500 families out of the rut of pauperism into proud, if modest, independence, without alms, but by a system of friendly visitation, and the work of the Society for Improving the Condition of the Poor and kindred organizations along the same line shows what can be done by well-directed effort. It is estimated that New York spends in public and private charity every year around $8 million. A small part of this sum, intelligently invested in a great labor bureau that would bring the seeker of work and the one with work to give together under auspices, offering some degree of mutual security, would certainly repay the amount of the investment in the saving of much capital now worse than wasted, and would be prolific of the best results. The ultimate and greatest need, however, the real remedy, is to remove the cause, the tenement that was built for a class of whom nothing was expected, and which has come fully up to the expectation. Tenement house reform holds the key to the problem of pauperism in the city. We can never get rid of either the tenement or the pauper. The two will always exist together in New York. But by reforming the one, we can do more toward removing the other than can be done by all other means together that have yet been invented or ever will be.